My mother said, "We're not celebrating Christmas with you," so I walked away without begging. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That sentence didn't just cancel a holiday, it erased my place in my own family. My name is Ria, and I was always the quiet daughter. I helped when I was needed and stayed silent when I was hurt. I believed that if I kept giving, one day I would feel included. I was wrong. That year had been hard. My parents, Mara and Cole, needed money for an emergency. I gave them my savings without thinking twice. I told myself family helps family. I skipped plans, worked extra hours, and never complained. A week before Christmas, my mother called me. Her voice was calm, almost careless. She said my brother Jace and his wife Lynn wanted a small celebration. Then she said it, the words that changed everything. I was not invited. I waited for a reason. None came. She didn't say sorry. She didn't explain. She just moved on to talking about food and decorations, as if I wasn't being pushed out. I felt something break inside me, but I didn't beg. I didn't argue. I simply said, "Okay," and ended the call. Later, I found out the truth. Jace felt uncomfortable because I had helped our parents. My presence reminded him of that. Excluding me was easier than facing guilt. So I chose myself. I stopped sending money. I stopped fixing problems that weren't mine. I focused on my work and moved into a small place of my own. Life became quieter, but lighter. Months later, my father called. He talked about bills, about how empty the holidays felt. He asked if we could go back to normal. I said no. That Christmas, I was alone, but I was free. Walking away without begging was my revenge. Not loud. Not cruel. Just final. I'm Ria, the kind of person people notice only when something breaks. Growing up, I learned early how to smooth tension, finish tasks others avoided, and step in before anyone had to ask. I didn't demand attention. I didn't compete for praise. I stayed useful, believing usefulness meant belonging. I built my life around being dependable. If something needed arranging, I handled it. If there was a gap, I filled it. I learned schedules, remembered details, and carried responsibility that was never officially mine. No one forced me, I volunteered, hoping effort would turn into appreciation. I stayed nearby, close enough to show up quickly, close enough to be counted on. Yet I kept enough distance to avoid being in the way. That balance felt safe. I convinced myself it was maturity, not avoidance. I thought staying out of sight made things easier for everyone. I rarely spoke up about what I needed. Asking felt selfish. Silence felt respectful. I watched others take space while I made room. Over time, that habit became my identity. I was reliable, steady, and unseen. Family praised my strength, but strength came with expectations. I was expected to understand, to forgive, to adjust. When choices were made, mine came last. When sacrifices were needed, I was already offering. I believed dedication worked like a deposit, put in enough care, and someday it would come back to me. I trusted that consistency would be rewarded, that loyalty was remembered even if it wasn't acknowledged right away. I didn't realize how easy it is to overlook someone who never complains. I mistook tolerance for respect. I confused being needed with being valued. By the time I noticed the pattern, it was already set. I had trained everyone around me to lean without asking how much weight I carried. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself patience mattered, that family bonds ran deeper than habits. I stayed steady. I stayed available. I stayed quiet. And for a long time, I truly believed that winter brought pressure I hadn't planned for. A sudden expense hit my parents, Mara and Cole, and panic filled their voices when they reached out. The amount was large, the deadline close, and the stress heavy. I didn't pause to calculate risk or comfort. I agreed immediately. I moved things around to make it work. Commitments were cancelled. Personal goals were postponed. Money set aside for my future disappeared in a single transfer. I told myself it was temporary, that security could be rebuilt later. Right then, they needed relief more than I needed stability. There were no dramatic conversations or promises. Just a quick thank you and a sense of urgency fading once the problem was solved. The crisis ended, but something shifted. The help I gave quietly became expected rather than appreciated. I adjusted my life around the loss. I worked longer hours, cut back on small comforts, and learned how far a budget could stretch. I didn't mention the strain. I didn't ask for reassurance. I believed sacrifice was understood without explanation. In my mind, support created balance. I thought stepping up meant standing together. I assumed care moved in both directions, even if it wasn't immediate. That belief kept me steady while I rebuilt what I had given away. Time passed, and the absence of acknowledgement grew louder than words. There was no follow-up, no concern about how I was managing, no recognition of what had been given up. Life returned to normal for them, but not for me. I started to notice how easily the situation was left behind. The urgency that once filled every call vanished. Conversations shifted to plans and comforts that no longer included my reality. It felt like the moment passed, and so did its meaning. That was when understanding arrived, slow and heavy. The action I thought created connection had only solved a problem. It didn't change how I was seen. It didn't deepen respect. It simply closed a chapter they no longer needed to think about. I learned then that effort doesn't guarantee consideration. Giving doesn't promise fairness. And family, sometimes, takes without ever learning how to give back. 7 days before the holiday, my phone rang while I was finishing a late shift. When I answered, Mara spoke like she was sharing ordinary news. Her tone carried no weight, no pause, no care. She mentioned arrangements already made, voices already chosen, plans already settled. She said Jace and Lynn wanted something that felt right to them. The words sounded polite, almost gentle, yet they built a wall I hadn't seen coming. There was no hesitation, no softening of what followed. Just a simple statement wrapped in calm certainty. I waited. Silence filled the space where concern should have been. I expected clarification, maybe an awkward laugh, maybe a last-minute adjustment. None came. She continued speaking, listing details that no longer involved me, as though my presence had never been assumed in the first place. The meaning landed slowly. This wasn't about space or timing. This was a choice already agreed upon. Decisions were made without my voice, my awareness, or my place considered. I was outside a moment that once felt automatic. Nothing in her voice suggested regret. No excuse followed. No question asked about my feelings or availability. The conversation moved forward without circling back, leaving me behind in its wake. I looked around my quiet room, realizing how sudden distance can feel when it's spoken out loud. A single sentence had shifted everything. Traditions I thought were shared were suddenly selective. Togetherness had limits I hadn't known existed. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge the reasoning. I absorbed the truth as it unfolded. Being left out wasn't accidental. It was clean, deliberate, and final in its delivery. When the call ended, the quiet felt different. Not heavy, clear. I understood then that inclusion isn't guaranteed by history. Familiarity doesn't protect against dismissal. Sometimes absence is decided before you even realize you're missing. That moment didn't hurt because of the holiday. It hurt because it revealed where I stood. Not central. Not necessary. Just optional. And once I understood that, I knew things would never return to what they were before. The words formed without effort. I answered calmly, with no shake in my voice. I offered no resistance, no questions, no reaction they could hold on to. Just a brief response, clean and contained. Then the call ended. There was no dramatic pause. No sharp breath. No need to explain myself. I let the moment pass exactly as it arrived. What they expected was emotion, pushback, disappointment, pleading. What they received was stillness. That quiet choice carried weight. It wasn't planned or rehearsed. It rose from a place that had already reached its limit. Speaking further would have handed them power. Silence took it back. I didn't linger on the line. I didn't wait for reassurance. I stepped away, physically and emotionally, from something that no longer made room for me. The absence of reaction shifted the balance. Confusion followed. Not spoken aloud, but felt. They were used to my presence filling gaps, my voice smoothing edges. This time, there was nothing to adjust, nothing to manage. Just a clean ending to the exchange. Walking away felt unfamiliar but steady. There was no collapse afterward. No spiral. Only a strange sense of clarity. I realized I didn't owe a performance of pain to prove importance. By not responding the way they expected, I changed the script. I refused to chase validation that was already denied. I didn't offer explanations or second chances. I accepted the boundary they set, and kept it. That single word carried finality. It closed a door without slamming it. It marked a line I hadn't drawn before. And in doing so, it protected what little dignity I still had. They anticipated pursuit. They prepared for persuasion. Instead, they faced absence. And absence has a way of revealing how much someone assumed you would stay. Leaving quietly wasn't weakness. It was restraint. It was choosing self-respect over argument. And for the first time, I didn't look back to see who noticed. Weeks passed before the truth came into view. Quiet conversations I overheard, fragments of remarks, and accidental slips slowly painted the picture. It wasn't about timing or tradition, it was about guilt, and how my presence made them face it. Jace had grown tense around me after the financial help. Every interaction seemed heavier, every smile strained. I realized they weren't avoiding me out of dislike, they were avoiding responsibility. Being reminded of what I had done, what I had given, made them uncomfortable in a way they couldn't admit. Exclusion became their shortcut. Instead of acknowledging my support, they erased me from the equation. They didn't have to face their unease. My absence was convenient, silent, and final. I felt a mixture of disbelief and clarity. Disbelief that something I had offered freely could be turned against me, and clarity that their version of family included only comfort, not fairness. What I had assumed was gratitude was actually a burden in their eyes. The realization stung, but it also freed me. I understood that my expectations had been misplaced. They weren't failing me, they were simply being exactly who they were, without shame or thought for what was fair. Once the truth became clear, the anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel emerged slowly. I saw how easily my kindness had been weaponized, not to hurt me directly, but to make them feel less accountable. Knowing the reason didn't bring relief, it brought direction. I could see the pattern of avoidance, the small acts of disregard, and the moments where my efforts had been taken for granted. I understood that trying to explain or confront would change nothing. Their solution had been simple: remove the complication, ignore the tension, pretend the issue didn't exist. I realized then that any reconciliation would have to start with boundaries, not words. Their discomfort had created a lesson I couldn't unlearn. Sometimes stepping back is the only way to reclaim respect. And in that quiet understanding, I finally accepted that absence could speak louder than any confrontation. After seeing the truth, I made a conscious choice: everything I had poured into others would return to me. I stopped bending my life to fix problems that weren't mine. My energy, once spent on managing theirs, now fueled my own growth. I searched for opportunities that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. A new position opened at a company that valued dedication, not family history or connections. I applied, prepared, and earned it on my own terms. It was the first time I felt my efforts would be recognized purely for what I offered, not what I owed. I found a small apartment away from the familiar chaos, a space where I could decide what mattered. Every corner reflected my choices, furniture I liked, routines I set, silence I could enjoy. It became a refuge, a place where I wasn't measured by others' expectations. Boundaries became my shield. I learned to say no without guilt, to keep distance from situations that once drained me, and to stop assuming responsibility for feelings that weren't mine to manage. For the first time, my time belonged to me. The emotional labor I had given so freely before, I redirected it inward. I journaled, reflected, and acknowledged my own needs. Nights that once ended in worry now ended in peace. Weekends that were once filled with errands for others became moments of rest and planning for my own future. Money, too, was no longer a tool for approval. I saved deliberately, spent thoughtfully, and invested in stability for myself rather than temporary fixes for people who didn't notice. Each decision reinforced the idea that I could thrive without depending on their recognition. I realized that growth doesn't have to be loud or visible. Quiet steps, consistent effort, and careful choices can rebuild a life piece by piece. And in that rebuilding, I felt stronger than I ever had before. For the first time, I wasn't running toward anyone else's expectation, I was moving steadily toward my own future. Months passed in quiet routine before Cole reached out. His voice carried a tone that was almost hesitant, like he was testing the water before fully speaking. He spoke of struggles, unexpected expenses, the weight of holiday preparations, and the emptiness that had settled over their house. He asked if we could return to how things used to be, as if nothing had changed. As he described their lonely celebrations, I listened without interrupting. The requests were familiar, but the intention behind them was clear. It hit me fully in that moment. What they called normal had never been about shared connection. Normal had always been about convenience for them. Their idea of togetherness required my effort, my money, and my time, while their own contribution was minimal, almost invisible. I realized this wasn't about hardship. It wasn't about missing me for who I was. It was about filling gaps only I had once filled. They wanted comfort restored, but only in the way that benefited them. My role as the fixer, the provider, the one who could be counted on without question, they wanted that restored, not a real relationship. For the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. Every gesture, every request, every expectation pointed to the same truth: I had been a solution, not a family member whose feelings mattered equally. That call, which might have been an opportunity for reconnection, instead confirmed my understanding. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of past exclusion, only a desire to resume the previous balance. Hearing it all laid out so plainly made the decision simple. I didn't have to explain boundaries. I didn't have to justify why things couldn't return to the way they were. I understood then that reclaiming my life meant rejecting the old normal entirely. Their needs didn't override my peace. Their loneliness didn't require my sacrifice. That call was the turning point. It made it impossible to ignore the truth. Continuing as before would only let them take, while I gave again without being valued. When the holiday approached, I received another call. I could feel the expectation behind it, the hope that I would bend, that I would step back into the role I had always filled. I listened carefully, letting their words settle without reaction. Then I spoke, simply and without drama: I'm busy this Christmas. No hesitation. No extra explanation. No argument. Just a statement that left no room for negotiation. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. I could sense their confusion, the shift in tone, the brief pause where they searched for a response that would never come. They expected pleading, excuses, or compromise. I gave none of it. It wasn't anger that guided me, and it wasn't revenge for the sake of hurt. It was something quieter, more powerful: self-respect. Choosing myself over obligation, peace over expectation, allowed me to reclaim control of a situation that had always been one-sided. I made no promises for next year, no tentative plans. I didn't justify why I was absent, nor did I offer reassurance. My decision was complete in its simplicity. That quiet refusal carried weight. Every unspoken word, every lack of apology, every calm tone communicated what anger could not: I would no longer be anyone's convenience. I was no longer available as a solution to their discomfort. I felt the shift immediately, even without seeing it. I could tell they were unsettled, unsure how to respond to someone who would no longer acquiesce. Their previous assumptions, that I would sacrifice, adjust, and smooth over problems, were dismantled with a single, simple truth. It was a subtle victory, one without drama or confrontation, but its impact was undeniable. I had drawn a line and protected the life I had rebuilt. That Christmas, I stayed home, quiet and unbothered. Peace filled the space where expectation once lived. My absence said everything I needed it to. For the first time, I wasn't missing out, I was stepping into freedom. That day, as I closed the door behind me, I felt a weight lift I hadn't even realized I was carrying. No one had forced me out, yet leaving without argument or tears gave me a strength I had never known. For the first time, their expectations no longer dictated my choices. The tension, the pressure to accommodate, the subtle demands, they all dissolved in my absence. They could no longer control my time, my emotions, or my decisions. I felt clear in a way I hadn't before. Every boundary I had set, every step I had taken toward independence, came together in that quiet moment. I finally understood what it meant to prioritize myself without guilt, to hold my life firmly in my own hands. Alone, I decorated my apartment with small touches that reflected me, not anyone else. The smell of pine, the soft glow of lights, the music I chose, every detail felt intentional, a quiet celebration of autonomy. That Christmas, solitude wasn't lonely. It was liberating. I realized I had been living in the shadows for too long, unnoticed and unacknowledged, and now I had space to exist fully, without compromise. In my absence, they may have felt discomfort or regret, but that no longer mattered. What mattered was my peace, my clarity, and the knowledge that I had reclaimed the part of myself that had been taken for granted. Walking away without begging was more than an act, it was a declaration. I had refused to be invisible any longer, refused to trade my dignity for comfort that was never mutual. I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply stands firm, quiet and unwavering, while the world adjusts around it. That Christmas, I was alone, but not powerless. I was present in my own life, fully seen by myself, finally free from the weight of others' control. It became the moment I realized that being true to myself was worth more than any family expectation, any tradition, or any holiday gathering. It was the moment I stopped disappearing. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my family, or should I have tried to forgive them and give them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories.